Hi, everybody. This is noon, noon local time in California. So I'm starting the discussion that we have, the meeting that somebody asked for to discuss pressure changes. And I can see some people are coming on. Hi, Angelica. I'm going to start since this is going to be recorded, and I will have to quit very early. Hi, Meta. I have to quit at 1 o'clock in 1 hour exactly because my younger granddaughter has a recital, so I won't be able to stay on for too long. Just want to make sure that you can hear me. Can somebody say whether you can hear me okay or not? Can you? Just write yes or no or something. Hey, somebody's from South Africa, Adrian. Can you guys hear me? Let me write. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay, cool. Thank you for the response. All right. So let's talk about pressure change. And this was a very good idea from somebody's part to discuss pressure change because, well, it's winter in the northern hemisphere and summer in the southern. So we do have a lot of pressure changes, particularly in the north at this time of the year. And we had some really strong pressure changes last week and the week before with huge storms. So it is a very apt subject. So let's talk about weather change. So first of all, a lot of people confuse weather change with pressure change. They're not the same. You can have completely perfect weather and you can have huge barometric pressure change at the same time. So the two don't connect. You can also have perfect steady pressure and completely different weather moving around. So you really need to watch the pressure more than the weather change. In other words, if you have rain coming in, it doesn't mean it's going to be low or dropping pressure. It can actually be increasing pressure. The pressure change is a little bit more local phenomena than what we can just generally say. Everybody thinks that when a cold front is coming in, it means lower barometric pressure. Perhaps generally so, but it isn't necessarily true. And it's also dependent upon your elevation. It also depends on what part of the world you are located in. The further north you go, the more likely that's to be the case. But the further south you go, that is from the northern hemisphere, from the southern hemisphere, the other way around, it may not be so. So don't look at fronts coming in or whether it's going to be raining or whether it's going to be sunny. That's not representing what pressure you will have to put up with. Pressure change is a phenomena of how air layers are moving, and there's quite a bit of turbulence all the time going on because air pressure tries to balance. Air temperature also tries to balance. It all tries to come to some sort of an equilibrium. So there's going to be a similar kind of phenomena as we have in our blood in terms of electrolyte. If there's not enough, there's going to be a little bit of equalization toward homeostasis. Same thing in barometric pressure as well as temperature change. So you need to know a little bit more about this. And you definitely need to watch Wunderground or something similar where they forecast the pressure, but I find that not to be enough. I have a pressure gauge on my wall at home, and it's quite a bit different from what Wunderground says is over my head. So you really should get, and they have a lot of documents about pressure monitors or what you should be getting on your wall, which shows temperature, humidity, etc. So the pressure is basically itself is associated with the weight of the air over your head as well as around you. So think of it that you are like in a bubble, and the bubble is surrounded by air from every angle. So it's a three-dimensional bubble. It's completely surrounding you, and the more the higher the pressure, it means the more it's pressing on you. So don't just think of it as a weight on your head, but it's basically weight everywhere around your body. It's like you're in this bubble and it's being squeezed. That's the increasing pressure. And the decreasing pressure is when this bubble is sort of kind of moving away from you, and it allows your body to expand. And our bodies are very flexible. We have Similar, think of it as, what is the name, the little ooey gooey stuff that children play with. But you can, depending upon where you put it, it can expand or it can contract. And however, we have a bone structure, we have all kinds of different systems that won't allow us to feel this change without any pain, particularly when it comes to the head. So when you're talking about a huge pressure increase, it is going to squeeze everything in your skull, except the skull is made of bone. It cannot be squeezed. So there's going to be pressure building up in there. And the pressure decrease when the pressure drops, everything is going to expand inside your skull, but the skull can't expand itself because it's a bone, right? So you have to look at the soft tissue changing, growing, or shrinking. And it may be very tiny, but the changes for us migraineurs are huge because we are so sensitized to changes of electrolyte, changes of body fluids. So you need to really pay attention to the pressure change. Now, I got really badly burned once, assuming that going to higher altitude, which normally has lower pressure. So if you go, for example, from Los Angeles, which is at sea level at the airport, to Denver, which is a mile high up, that is where I got burned with a migraine a couple of years ago, because I didn't look at winter ground. It was, I don't even remember, I think it was December or something like that. And it was cold, January, December. I figured, okay, so they're going to have a lower pressure. It's higher altitude. It's 1 mile higher than sea level. So obviously I have to salt up. So I salted quite a bit. When I got there, I left from the Los Angeles airport area. I think the pressure was 29 inches mercury. When I got to Denver, which is a mile higher up, it was over 30. So I had a huge pressure increase in less than 2 hours. I think the flight is like 1.5 or maybe 2 hours. And I didn't count on that. I did exactly the opposite of what I should have. And my fault for not looking at Wunderground. So I recommend that you always look at Wunderground because you can't make assumptions. So altitude definitely has a tendency to have different pressure as you go, but it isn't necessarily the case. It is very much dependent upon the weather, what kind of fronts they have moving through. And so you need to take a good look at it. I got definitely burned for 3 days from that pressure because I so salted up. And as you know, once you salt it up, the potassium is harder to come by. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, about the potassium that we can use to make sure that we can a little bit quicker decrease our built-in pressure if we salt it up instead of reducing the salt. Now, the pressure forecasting service, such as Wunderground, they are looking at a national, generally speaking, a national pressure and air movement. And so there are local pressure changes. So for example, I am up in a hill, and on the hill where I am, it's only about 500 feet above sea level, but there are at least 40 weather stations that I can hook into via Wunderground. It is important for you to look specifically the weather stations that you have in your neighborhood, because if I've looked at one day and compared all the different weather stations within my area, and every single one of them shows something else. So you need to really look at what is as close to your location as possible. So don't just look at, say, New York. Look specifically where in the state of New York, because you will have variabilities depending upon your altitude, the distance from the ocean, and all kinds of other factors will count into it, including even how many tall buildings you have in the neighborhood, and how rural neighborhood you are in. Everything matters, so look all of them on. Now let's talk about what to do for the different pressures. So dropping pressure. I've seen many comments in the group, people saying, well, it's low pressure. But once it's already low, you're too late. You really need to look to see what to expect. To control for a pressure that is dropping and is already reached a the lowest level is easier than the other way around when the pressure is increasing. And that's because when the pressure is dropping, as I explained earlier, everything kind of relaxes and expands. So your blood vessels ever so tinily, a little bit expand, they relax. And so what that means is if you have a glass of water, you can have a glass of water in something that is this tall and about that fat, or the same glass of water in something that is this fat and that tall. It's it's the same amount of water, but the difference is how far that water can reach up. And so there's a relative volume difference. So when you have a very low pressure as it is dropping, your blood vessels, or think of the glass of water, which was like this, is now getting wider and wider and wider. So the water, even though it doesn't change how much blood and electrolyte you have, it keeps on dropping and dropping and dropping because the blood vessel is actually widening. So when your blood vessel is widening, your relative blood volume is lower. So your heart is going to have to pump hard, with higher pressure and harder to reach all your body, including your brain. And so this is going to modify how well your blood circulation is running. This is why on a reduced barometric pressure, you're going to find that your rings are turning around, because you literally have less volume in every single finger, less volume of blood everywhere. And so you really need to then salt up, which is what we call it. And it's not just salt, it's salt and water, because you need to increase the blood volume. Now, this is going to be temporary, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the RAS system, which is the renin angiotensin aldosterone system that the kidney is working with. I wanted to put it in here because I want you to understand that every time we salt up, if we don't use the amount of salt that we took in, then our body is just going to eliminate it. So every kind of increase, every time we take a salt, 1/8 teaspoon of a salt, be it salt pill, capsule, or just straight salt, it doesn't matter, your kidneys will eliminate any extra. And so the way that this works is that assume that you have a certain amount of salt in your body. Typically, an adult has between 1/2 to 1.5 pounds of sodium in the body total as cell. This is the most amount of mineral that we store in our body, other than calcium, which becomes bone. So salt is the kind of mineral that continuously exchanges itself, which is salt. This is the most amount that we carry in our body. And so when we're talking about taking extra salt, so if you have a pound of salt in your body in general, if you not take 1/8 of a teaspoon, it's not going to be making that much of a difference in terms of your body. However, whatever is in your body is already in your body, not body. I'm sorry for the pronunciation there. So whatever you have inside is in your cells already. It is functioning with your neurons to create already electricity, voltage, and so those are already taken. They're not free sodium. So when you take salt with water, that salt, for a short time, while it is still circulating in your blood, it is going to become free sodium. And so the free sodium can then make connections and allow your blood volume to increase. However, by the time it gets to, if it's not used by your brain, by the time it gets to your kidneys, it is going to be cleared off, because the role of the kidney is to maintain a perfect electrolyte homeostasis at all times. So you have a certain amount of sodium, a certain amount of potassium, a certain amount of water. These are the three that the kidneys actually modulate, although there is magnesium and calcium and other kind of things, but the kidney is really functioning. This renin angiotensin aldosterone system that I call the RAS, or RAS, if you wish, system, is focused on making sure that this balance is always the same. So if you take, and I'm just going to say a number here, 1 whole teaspoon of salt, that is a lot of sodium. That's a lot more sodium than what we normally need for 1 glass of water. Now you have too much sodium in your body, and as it hits your blood goes through your liver, I think 4 or 5 times every hour. So we're talking about pretty quickly, 15-20 minutes, the extra sodium will be cleared out of your blood, because the moment it hits the kidneys, it will go through a filtration system, which then, if the filtration system notices that you have this RAS system, notices that you have more sodium in the blood than you should have, it's a different electrolyte from what the ideal homeostasis is. So it will kick in the renin. Renin is a particular enzyme that will kick into the kidneys and it's going to make sure that the extra sodium is removed. So a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, you will waste sodium. We also refer to this as dump. So you're wasting sodium, meaning you're going to urinate more sodium out than you normally would be. At the same time, you're also losing water because you can't urinate without water. So you can't just dump sodium. Your body has to lose water as well as sodium. So even though you're trying to increase your blood volume by taking extra salt, if it's too much, you're actually dehydrating yourself. You need to sort of kind of feel the right amount. So we're taking them 1/8 teaspoon at a time because it's small enough to control what we're taking, and we can always take more if we need to. But if it's too much for our body, the RDA system will just remove a little bit of water. They're not going to be dehydrated. And in this case, the potassium is going to be retained, which is called spared. So the RDA system is really a balancing between the sodium, potassium, and it's using water to control how much it lets out and how much it saves. So you need to be sure that when the pressure is dropping, you're taking enough salt, but you're not taking too much, and you're not taking it too fast, because if you do, then rather than increasing your blood volume, we're actually decreasing it, and you're going to run into trouble. So a little at a time, but don't do it in advance, because again, as long as the pressure is not yet dropping, it's just forecast to be dropping, I don't know, half an hour from now. If you take salt and water now, the pressure currently, it hasn't changed. So this RAS system is going to just waste the sodium. That's not what you want. So when the pressure is dropping, you want to make sure that you start increasing your sodium at the time when the pressure starts dropping. And you need to know how much the pressure is dropping, if it's going to be minimal, and what minimal is, where is per person. So let's talk about also what is a small pressure drop versus a large pressure drop. And I can only now give the information in inch mercury. Sorry, for those of you who are in a metric system, I have forgotten how that one calculates and how I didn't calculate it over. But for each person, the amount of increase or decrease matters. For example, for me, I'm extremely sensitive to pressure drop. So if the pressure goes from 30.00 to 29.99, which is really a 0.01 inch, it's very tiny, I feel that. So for me, it is important. For you, it may not be. So you need to sort of wait out, unfortunately, to see what degree of pressure change you're sensitive to. And you may find that you're sensitive to different levels of changes when it is dropping versus when it is increasing. So you need to check and evaluate, just like we check and evaluate our weight every single morning to see if we retained water or if we didn't retain. For those who still have menstrual cycles, to see which protocol to use for prevention of migraine. You want to do the same thing with pressure change. You have to observe yourself. You need to know what to do and how to do. So we covered pressure dropping. Now, pressure increase is a little bit more difficult. And that is because whereas in a pressure drop, we're adding sodium, and sodium has a very quick way of getting into our body, and including just placing salt under our tongue, and it can completely bypass our digestive systems, and it can enter into the electrolyte system immediately from there. Potassium is not the same. I have written an article on this, which you can find in the group under units, under files. So taking potassium as a supplement can cause serious trouble. The FDA limits the maximum amount of potassium supplement one can take to less than 100 milligrams. So that's a very, very tiny amount. And if you take it, even at that small amount, it doesn't actually enter into the electrolyte. Potassium taken in a significant amount absorbs at once, and its function is different from sodium in that it's supposed to actually do the opposite from sodium. So sodium and potassium work together, work the sodium-potassium pump. The sodium-potassium pump's function is to open and close the gates such that when the sodium rushes into the cell. Normally, sodium is around the cells in the interstitial space, and potassium is inside the cells. That's the default position. But this default doesn't hold for very long. It's a continual movement. So think of the sodium-potassium pump that presses sodium, that generates electricity for the cell. Think of it as a respiration, as if like inhale, air comes in, exhale, whatever air you use, and the leftover with all the toxins in it comes out. So for the cell, the neuron, so to speak, they're not breathing oxygen. It's like a cellular mechanism to use the sodium in, sodium out, potassium in, potassium out. There's an exchange, a trade. So through these pumps, which are what is called the voltage dependent or voltage gated pump, either the 3 sodium molecules are coming in and 2 potassium molecules are going out, and the sodium rushing in causes the action potential. That is actually which initiates the voltage itself, the electricity. And then when it switches around, the potassium is rushing in and the sodium rushing out. And again, it's 3 sodium and 2 potassium, I believe, and maybe the other way around. Then it's the resting potential. So that's when I consider it as an exhale. So your body just gonna, that's the relaxation state, after which it goes into a refractory state where nothing can happen. So that refractory state is representative of when they're talking about the potassium in the cell and sodium out of the cell. So that is not really necessarily the ideal position for the cell to be, but it is a state where nothing can happen to the cell. It cannot fire an electricity, cannot move. It's almost like a heartbeat between 2 beats. It's like a period of rest where the heart recharges, the cell recharges, everything recharges to be able to take another breath again, or in this case, to have another amount of sodium coming in. And so when you're talking about it this way, potassium is inside the cells. So when you take a potassium supplement, it's not going to be in the cell. It's coming into the surrounding area of the cell, which is connected to the blood vessels. So you're going to have a lot more potassium in the blood than what you should be having. If you've taken a blood test where they looked at your electrolyte, you get a reading on potassium, sodium, chloride, and some other elements. And you can see that the range for the sodium, because it's in the blood where they're taking the sample from and not in the cell, the range for the sodium is like 140, and the range for the potassium is like 4, something like that. There's a range for both of them. So you can see there's a huge magnitude difference between the two. But this is just because, in general, sodium is in the blood and outside of the cell, and potassium is inside of the cell. And so when you take a potassium supplement, it has no way of getting into the cells unless there is going to be some kind of an electrical exchange where whatever sodium is in there is coming out and potassium is going in, which requires a resting potential. So this is not going to happen continuously. So you can't artificially increase potassium in your blood without negative consequences. You can increase sodium in the blood because that's where it is supposed to be. It's not going to enter into the cell without some electrical function. So potassium doesn't belong to the blood as much as sodium does. So taking potassium that goes into the blood can cause major problems, heart arrhythmia. It can even cause death. Athletes who take potassium, for example, right after some kind of a event, I'm always concerned about people drinking, for example, coconut water or coconut juice after, I don't know, some kind of sport activity. And there was a fad for a while that everybody said it's so hydrating. No, it's not hydrating. It's actually very dangerous. People, particularly migraineurs, even when we don't take any potassium, but we go for a bigger walk or we exercise, we release a lot of potassium from inside of the cell into the blood, and we end up with hyperkalemia, which is too much potassium in the blood. And there are people who run marathons who die from that. So taking potassium is not possible. Don't even ever think of doing that unless your doctor told you to do so. If you are on a medication that is a diuretic, that's a different story. Then you will need to have some potassium because diuretic removes potassium from you. So with this said, then, when the pressure is increasing and we can't take a potassium supplement like we do with a sodium supplement, what do we do? Up until now, we have not ever considered drinking coconut water. I've added coconut water to our possibilities. Just please note that it is only to be used in extreme emergency, and I will detail what that is, because it is high in carbs. Even if you get the completely unsweetened potassium, completely just freshly chopped off of a fresh coconut in front of you and you drink it, it is extremely high in carbohydrates. It may not be sweet. You may not even know that there's sweet in it, but it's naturally sweet and it has natural carbohydrates. So a glass of coconut water, 8 ounces I'm talking about, can easily contain anywhere, depending on the brand, between 11 to I've seen as high as 20 carb grams. And so we're talking about significant carbs that are not necessarily a good thing, particularly when you're trying to work against the pressure increase, because you can't solve for the carbohydrate. That's the whole point. You need more potassium. So while I have added coconut water for extreme emergencies, note that this is not a solution to go for unless you really have no alternatives. The alternatives that are working would be like avocado, or on a carnivore diet have salmon, particularly the wild caught salmon, Pacific salmon, is extremely high in potassium. Just about all meat types, pork, chicken, they all have high amount of potassium. And so you can make up potassium. Milk is a good potassium source, but it also has sodium in it. The important thing is that when the pressure is increasing, because it takes time for your body to digest that avocado or romaine lettuce, or, well, don't eat romaine lettuce. There's so many E. coli infections these days. But any other kind of or nuts that you may eat that are high in potassium, they take time because the stomach has to literally break it up with the hydrochloric acid in our stomach to digest it, and then it has to be absorbed and go through a metabolic process. So we're talking about approximately an hour to 2 hours before the potassium from these foods can actually enter into your electrolytes to be able to work with the increasing pressure. So you need to prepare for increasing pressure. You always need to prepare for dropping pressure. You don't. You just start taking the sodium when it drops. For increasing pressure, you need to start preparing 1 or 2 hours before the pressure is about to increase. So that is a little bit more difficult because you do have to watch underground, and you also should be watching what's happening over your head. And if you're not yet sensitive to, say, that 0.01 inch mercury increase, but you know that more is coming, maybe that's the time for you to start taking some potassium food. I am extremely sensitive, so I can tell you a story that happened to me actually 2 weeks ago when we had that major front going through all over the United States, and it hit California first. We didn't really have a temperature or weather change. We just had a huge pressure change. And one day we went, and I knew it, and it was forecast, but unfortunately I was on a funeral all day. I could not touch, and the food that they served had absolutely no potassium. Everything was fried food. There was just nothing I could do, and you can't actually eat or take extra food to a funeral. It was just, would not have been, it was an Irish funeral. It's just not something that you do. So I suffered through it, and then by the time I got home, I used the coconut water, and that helped. But that day, the pressure moved from, I think it was 29.45 was the lowest I've ever seen, not ever, but for a long time. So we started at 29.45, and then it moved throughout the day. It was a continual movement. It started at night, and it moved all through the night and all through the next day to almost 30.30. I mean, it was just an astronomical, or maybe it was higher than 30.30. It was just an astronomical number. So it went up, and continuously. It's like every time I looked at my pressure gauge, like say every half an hour, it went up with 0.01. It was just a ridiculously painful event. And of course, when I was not at home, I have an app on my phone that literally just looks at the actual barometric pressure, and then it graphs for me the increase or decrease over the day or over the week or whatever I want to see. And it was just like, oh, whoop, like that. And it was a huge blip in the radar. And this happened again since, but then I was at home and I was able to totally avert it with the proper food. But so sometimes you can't avert it, and you can't plan ahead because you're on an entire day changing, increasing nonstop barometric pressure. It just keeps on increasing. It's just really not like one giant jump in 1 hour, but it's a continual movement for 24 hours. And then you really can't prepare very well because it's continually moving. So what I ended up doing that day is I literally had no salt at all. I ate all my food with a reduced salt. I changed my ratio to the lowest one that we have. And I did not take any salt capsules. In my case, I take the Health by Principle capsules. I took none. And so this was the first day in I don't know how many years that I didn't actually take any salt at all. It was a really weird day because I have the app where I enter the salt and now it's just at 0. And it was a really weird day. And I did get bit by that particular pressure increase because of the funeral. So I had a migraine that was about a day and a half, 2 days long, which was okay. I could, but by the time I got home, I was able to drink coconut water, and that helped. And by the evening, it was coming. It was, my head was going settling down, and by the morning, I was fine. But it was a retroactive action because I couldn't prepare. But then we had another such pressure increase just a day or two ago, where I just felt that something was not right, and it didn't show on Wunderground on my end that there was going to be a pressure increase. That was, I mean, it was just a little bit of a movement, but it was not like a real increase coming up. But on my meter at home, I see that, hey, the pressure is increasing right over my head. And it just wasn't showing on Wunderground. So at that time, because it was delayed, I had, again, a coconut water because I was already starting to feel it. And then after the coconut water, I had a huge dinner with a burger that I didn't salt at all, no salt, 0 salt. And had a salad with an avocado. I'm now on the protocol diet, not on the, I'm still in ketosis, but I'm on a protocol diet and not on the carnivore diet. And by the after time, right after dinner, all my head problems were gone. So I completely was able to change my situation from something really horrific migraine to absolutely no problem. So here we come. So just to summarize one more time, is that when the pressure is dropping, you want to take sodium or salt as it is dropping on the go. And every time you feel some kind of a prodrome, take another salt pill and another glass of water. You need to understand how your body reacts to the pressure. And so when you start feeling a prodrome, just take another salt pill and water. The pressure increasing is the opposite. You're stopping salt and you're only taking foods high in potassium, and in emergency, coconut water. Now, fast changing pressure. This is a question that arrived today, and I just added it in here. Somebody asked, when you have very fast pressure changes, it's really not possible for you to control for that. So say some kind of a pressure change like that is what we have today and tomorrow, where I am in Southern California. And basically the graph looks like this, like every hour up, every hour down, but it's a smaller amount. So we're not talking about huge increases up and down within the hour, but within the hour, there could be ups and downs several times. And if you're sensitive like I am, then that's going to happen. So for those of us in the, excuse me, in the protocol group, we don't fast, so we don't have a way to avoid it that way. Although if you would like to start to fast and you're not on any medication, you need to move over to the keto group, and there you can actually prevent all these problems by and large by fasting. In the protocol group, what I found was very useful is to make sure that you have an overdose of both sodium and potassium. So eat more. So on the days when you have these up and down, very many times, fast changing pressure, just eat more. And that's going to give both sodium and potassium. So your body was going to take whatever it needs at that time, and it's really going to help you, and it's going to work. Now talk about rain. So there are differences associated with rain. Temperature could be extreme heat or extreme cold, and also winds. And I think that this is worthy to mention. Here's my cat coming in. It is worthy to mention because there may be some issues associated with these weather changes, even though the pressure itself doesn't change. So for example, you may be sensitive to humidity changes. I know that I am terribly sensitive to humidity changes. And in California, Southern California, where I live, normally our humidity is very low. In the summers, we go down to as low as 1%. And in the fall too, we often have descending the winds and the big fires that you see. And those are the fires that are associated with extremely dry temperatures, which I call the nose bleeding weather, because when it's 1% humidity, you can't really do anything but just bleed, basically. So when you have very, very dry weather, and such a hot dry weather as what I'm describing, and I think that Denver and some other mountain areas also get pretty dry in the winter. So you go down to 10%, 15% humidity, maybe 20% humidity. Those are pretty low humidity. So what that means is that every time you open your mouth and you say hi or give a presentation like I do, you're losing a lot of moisture because the air is so dry that it's going to take a lot of moisture out of you. And when moisture is taken out of you, there's a lot of water taken out, but also sodium. Not that much potassium. We don't typically lose much potassium because, again, as I explained, potassium is inside the cells. So it's not really accessible for loss via heat or cold or by any means through our blood, because we have, like I said, the electrolyte potassium amount in our blood is 4 to 5, whereas the sodium is 135 to 140 something. So we're talking about the 30-40 magnitude difference in there. So when we breathe or when we just are in the cold or in the heat, what we actually perspire or lose in our breath even is basically salt and water and not potassium. So the only thing that we need to replace is sodium and water. So when you are in an environment that is extremely dry, the minimum water to be met is taken for granted. You need to add extra water, and the extra water requires extra salt. Now, as you know, we also calculated the maximum amount of water that you should be drinking, and you should not exceed the maximum. This is an exception. So if you live in an environment where the humidity drops significantly any time of the year, and you know that you're losing a lot of water and sodium as a result, you may have to exceed your maximum because you're just simply losing so much water from your body. But you always have to make sure that you add salt to that water. So don't ever drink water without salt if it is an extremely dry air, because you're losing both equally, okay? Potassium you don't lose, magnesium you don't lose. So these are not elements that are involved in being extremely hot and perspiring or working out in the gym. You don't ever have to add the potassium back in, only the sodium. Just focus only on the sodium and nothing else, sodium and water, okay? So don't drink electrolyte drinks that have potassium in them because you're just causing damage, okay? So this would be if you have extremely dry air. Now, what would you do if you have extremely humid air? For example, we in Southern California, where I am, we go through huge humidity variations. For the past several days, we've been having rain on and off, and some days the whole day, which is really rare for us. Very happy that it's raining. It's about once every 10 years that we have this. But our humidity this morning, when I looked, was 90%. So we go from 1% to 90%. So that's a huge difference, right? So you can see on my hair too that it's a lot curlier than normally it is. I do have curly hair, and it curls up from the humidity, which I really enjoy. But humidity can also cause a problem in that your body doesn't want to drink. I have to force my water down because I'm not evaporating. Unless I go to the gym, I'm not actually evaporating any water, very minimal. And also, I sleep with a tape, and that's something that we're going to talk about. I tape my mouth. So when you have extreme humidity, you may find that your body does not even want to have the minimum water. I recommend you always still drink your daily minimum. I have tried what happens if I don't drink my daily minimum. My minimum is 9 glasses. And if I don't drink my daily minimum, then I will end up getting a little bit of a prodrome by the next day. May even be a little bit constipated. I mean, it's still going to be okay, but I can feel that it changes. So you really need to have your minimum water. We migraineurs use a lot more water than other people, as well as a lot more salt. It's all electrolyte movement of all these liquids and fluids to generate more electricity and to clear all the extra from our bodies. So we do use more water, we do use more salt. And so you need to make sure that these things are replenished, even if you're practically in the water all day long. You're still losing some, and so you need to make sure that you meet your minimum. You may not want to go above that again unless you work out. Working out in this kind of a changing environment in both pressure as well as weather or humidity and rain and wind and everything else, which I'm still going to talk about, can make it a little bit difficult. As you know, I work out, I lift weights. And for example, yesterday, I was lifting weights and it was raining while I was lifting weights. And I was not thirsty. However, if I don't drink, I know I'm in trouble. So I just had to force it down. There's just simply no other way. You have to set your clock and you have to drink on time. If there's no other way, because your body is telling you had enough water, for us, that's not a good thing. For other people who are not migraineurs, yes, they may be able to listen to their internal signals of thirst. For us, that actually doesn't work. That's simply. So we need to make sure that we always drink our minimum and only exceed the maximum if it's extremely dry. And it doesn't have to be hot, by the way, to be dry. So you can have a winter with extremely dry temperatures, very cold. That means you're losing a lot of water. And so then in that winter day, no matter how cold it is, you need to make sure you drink more than your minimum and you keep on drinking. And it's important to note that you can preserve some of the moisture in your body by taping your mouth at night. I didn't bring the tape here to show you, but I'm using a tape. And I tape my mouth horizontally as well as vertically because I tend to wiggle my way out of that. I don't even know how I do that at night. And I oftentimes, when I just had it horizontally, I oftentimes would end up still breathing under it and I would wake up for my jaw dropping and the sound coming in. And so that's not an option. So I use a tape, which I think is called NextCare, which is hypoallergenic, and it's made specifically for the face. It is excellent. I've been using it now for about 2 or 3 years, and I can't envision myself sleeping without it. It is preserving also your humidity. So if I wake up at night to go to the bathroom, I don't need to drink. I'm not thirsty and don't ever have to drink at night. So it saves you a little bit of waking up time if you have to go to the bathroom. And unless it's extremely dry, like a 1% humidity, and I humidify the home. But if I have 1% humidity, even with the tape on, I may dry out enough through my nose, breathing through my nose, that I have to wake up and drink. So that can happen depending on the humidity. So we talked about, now what about the rain in general? So right now it's raining outside. And the thing that happens to some people, like to me, is I tend to feel sort of kind of calm and I want to sleep all day. Don't let that fool you. If you feel that way on a rainy day, that is going to lead to a migraine. So what you want to do is you want to keep active. And so one of the reasons why that is, I explained, is that if there is a dropping barometric pressure, and not always, but oftentimes with a rainy weather, there's a dropping barometric pressure. For us, there's an increase. So definitely not on time, not always. But if there is a dropping barometric pressure and you feel what we call under the weather, that would be a sign that your blood pressure is dropping. And we already have low blood pressure. I don't know about you, but for me, a normal everyday blood pressure is around 100/60. I'm very happy if it goes to 110/70. In a doctor's office where I always have the white coat syndrome, it usually goes up to 117/77, and I'm really happy about that. But coming home from the gym, for example, it's oftentimes 80/50. So it can get really, really low. And because of the huge variability of our blood pressures, and because that is driven quite a bit by our blood volume, you need to make sure that in a time of rain, if it is in fact coming with a low pressure and it pulls you down emotionally and otherwise, that it's going to get you in trouble. Because remember what happens in an emotional response to something, you release glucose, right? Your cortisol and adrenaline and all the stress hormones that release when you feel a little bit emotional about something. And being kind of depressed are similar hormones, not quite adrenaline and cortisol, but similar hormones that release that sort of depress you. And that actually causes shifts in electrolyte fluids as a result of the blood glucose that is going to increase or decrease depending upon what mood you're going through and depending upon your metabolic status. And so if it's a rainy day and there's a lower pressure and you feel kind of down, and even if you had your salt and water and you feel comfortable about the pressure, as long as you stop moving, you will end up in a migraine. So if there is a low, you feel this kind of, you're low, you're under the weather, that's the time for you to go for a walk, go and do some exercise, do some similar to the exercises we do when we have to increase blood glucose and reduce blood ketones. Do something that can help your blood circulation move around. We had somebody, I think it was Debbie the other day, who went to some show and the chair was too tall and her feet were just dangling and she ended up having blood circulatory issues. So for us, blood circulatory issues are very common, more common than for other people because we have low blood pressure. If we had high blood pressure, or if Debbie had high blood pressure, she would have had no problems whatsoever because high blood pressure would have carried all the fluids continuously without any problem. But with low blood pressure, that just doesn't work that way. And also doesn't work that way with extreme high blood pressure. So we're talking about there has to be a perfect zone in there. So now let's talk about cold and let's talk about wind. We still have about 10 minutes left for that. So cold. Cold itself, the thing that cold does is the opposite of heat in terms of where your blood vessels are. So you can, for example, let's see if you can see on my hand anywhere. I don't know if you can see my blood vessels. I'm going to hold my hand a little bit vertically down to see if I can increase the blood vessels to show you. So here, so you can see it a little bit better perhaps. So I have very strong blood vessels, but it's very hot right now in my room. Not very hot, but it's comfortably hot, okay? These blood vessels are there for your body. They're actually, they move. So what happens is it's hot outside. The blood vessels come closer to the surface of the skin in order to support evaporating of the heat or the extra heat to cool your body. So this is part of your autonomous nervous system, which forces your body's temperature control to work, because your body has to be within a narrow temperature range or you're going to be trouble and too cold or too hot. And so when you are in a cold environment, these blood vessels that I showed you that I have pretty pronounced today would actually disappear. So you would not see any of my blood vessels at all. It's very hard to see because of the light somehow, but it's quite dark blue and quite pronounced standing out for me. In a cold, they actually disappear. And that's because the blood vessels move inside, closer to the inside and away from the skin. And it may just be a few millimeters, but it's enough for you to not be able to see them. Or if you want to take, for example, the 5-hour test or check your blood glucose and ketones, you may not be able to get enough blood out of there because all these micro blood vessels, the capillaries have moved deeper inside. This makes the skin whiter color as well, lighter color for those of us who don't have white skin, but it's a lighter color. And this then, the removal of the blood vessels from the outside means that as the blood vessels move in, they also have to shrink a little bit. So when your blood, it's a vasoconstrictor effect. So a cold air can shrink your blood vessels and vasoconstrict at the same time. So probably the first thing that's going to happen to you is you'll have to go and urinate because it has to get rid of some water. But when it gets rid of some water, it also gets rid of salt and also gets rid of potassium, provided that you were in electrolyte homeostasis, because now you're in a cold and so it needs to be less. Now in the cold, while you're outside, this is going to be okay. But the moment you come indoors and suddenly your blood vessels vasodilate, then you're not going to have enough electrolyte and enough blood volume. So you need to increase. And so the moment you come in from cold outdoors, drink some water and salt, because that's going to be the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a migraine or start a prodrome because you don't have enough blood at that point. And the opposite is true in extreme heat. So in extreme heat, you're going to have oil blood vessels come to the surface of the skin, and it's going to evaporate a lot of heat, but it will also evaporate a lot of moisture. Plus, the coming to the surface and the blood vessels will increase in size. So you're going to have a vasodilation, which will then drop the relative blood volume. So it's going to then appear as if you dropped electrolyte, and you're going to get a prodrome because you don't have enough electrolyte. So in either case, you have to really pretty closely watch what is actually happening. And you can look at it pretty much by looking at your hand. And for those of us who have Raynaud's or a cold urticaria, these are very typical for us migraineurs. Many of us have them. These seasons, when we're moving into cold, can cause a problem for us because we have a vasoconstriction problem to start with in our extremities. So our fingers, for some people, their legs as well, can turn totally white or blue, depending on the two kinds. And I don't know what the difference is. And it's extremely painful. I have Raynaud's. Mine turn white and in between major red areas. And so you really have to take care to be sure that if you have that condition, you really need to make sure that you try to hydrate properly, because this is going to constrict your blood vessels, and you try to put your fingers and toes, whatever is affected, into hot water or hot air right away. A cold urticaria that can happen anywhere on your body, not necessarily on the extremities. It could be your face, your ears, the thighs, even if you have clothes on, say in a colder wind. Again, this is a vascular issue. Your blood vessels on the surface of your skin, the cheek, somebody gets really red cheek in a cold weather outdoors, or comes in with red ears. That would be me with the red ears coming in. That would be cold urticaria. It's a very similar idea to Raynaud's. It's itching very badly. You may even get hives. Some people do. And so you, again, have to watch the hydration, but you also need to watch the temperature. So cold urticaria would be very specific to winds. And it doesn't need to be cold. It just has to be a colder wind than where you are. I've been known to get cold, itchy urticaria from 65 degrees outside, which is really not cold, and one is dressed up. But as long as there's some wind, which is a little bit lower in temperature, I may end up with an itching nightmare for about a half an hour. So hydration is not going to dissolve it, but it's going to help it. And you definitely need to watch the temperature where you go afterwards. And if you don't have a chance to properly monitor these, you may end up with a migraine. So consider Raynaud's, urticaria. All these things are basically symptoms that are possibly prodromes for migraineurs who are sensitive to having Raynaud's and urticaria, because these are responses to the environmental change. And so we are talking now here about weather and change of weather and environmental changes. So these conditions are changed as a result of the weather. Okay. So I think I've covered everything. Extremely cold, what about winds? Yeah, I've covered everything. So we are just about on time, and I'm gonna call it quits so that I can go to attend my granddaughter's recital. And so if you have any questions, then post it later in a separate comment, so I will know how to respond to them. I can find them. Okay, so maybe we can start a discussion thread about the video, maybe in the bottom of this or somewhere else. This video is going to be saved in the files under units, so you can enter it later on and watch it later on again if you have any questions. So it's nice meeting you all. Have a great weekend, and talk to you later. Bye now.